Hello, this is Kristen, and this is my presentation for artifact tracking for data meeting 2. So for this meeting, we decided to go with my data, which was awesome for me because it's nice to see how this is actually applied to the data that I collected in school this past semester. And the exploratory question we used is, why are students performing well in the midpoint but showing little to no or negative improvement by the final? This is important to me personally because I use this data for my SLO this year. And as you can see, I only reached 72% of my goal. So it's important for me to reflect so I can improve for next year. So as a group, we used Blue Jeans and Google Docs to discuss and share our data. So we brought 5 different artifacts that were discussed as a group. Each of us presented our artifact, explained whether or not we saw a learning gap or an instructional gap, and then as a group we decided about the significance and the prominence of that gap, if there was one, based on the data. So I presented first, and the first thing that I presented was a calendar of my teaching schedule in this unit. So I teach this class every other day for 50 minutes. And this just shows a brief overview, like what were the main topics for my lessons. And the big takeaway that we saw was that we had a slower introduction from the pretest to the midpoint, and then it got more complex and faster moving from the midpoint to the final. So we saw that as an instructional gap. So we labeled that here, that there was not enough time on the later lessons, and that may have had something to do with the exploratory question that we were looking at. Brady provided his data, which was homework completion numbers for the 25 students and attendance for those students. And then after his presentation, he was able to mark here that the homework was a learning gap because we noticed that many of the students were not completing homework later on. And we said that that was pretty significant. That's something that we talked about. You know, if the students aren't able to understand or complete the work on their own in a practice situation, then it's possible that they weren't able to do well on the test. And the prominence we decided was a 1 because this is something that was happening across the board, not necessarily just the students who performed poorly later on. And then with the student attendance, we actually decided that there wasn't really a gap identified because attendance was really good across the board. Next, Verna provided us with some quiz grades. So what we saw was very similar to what we had in the original data. So we saw a learning gap, which meant that we had transitions from the midpoint assessment to the final was just moving too quickly, and the transitions weren't there. The students weren't able to connect the information as well as we needed them to. So we said that the significance was pretty high, 4, because if we were able to attack that earlier on, maybe they would have done better on the final, and that the prominence was around 3 because it happened to some students but not to all students. The last thing that I provided, based on our conversation in the meeting on the calendar, I wanted to show everyone what the worksheets look like. So this was one of the last worksheets that my students worked on before the final, and it's just very obvious that we're moving a lot quicker now. So it introduces the topic very quickly. You just kind of draw out some symbols here, and it assumes you already know it, and this kind of throws you in without giving you multiple entry points, which it did in the first couple of lessons that we had. So if you were lost before this point, this definitely didn't help. So we put that down as an instructional gap because there was not enough time for the students or enough practice options for the students to really grasp the material. They were expected to kind of get it with very little information being presented to them. Overall, I thought that this meeting went a lot better than our first meeting. We were able to meet as a group without time commitment issues, and we were able to work together really well. We were very supportive. We asked a lot of questions, and I really liked using Blue Jeans, which was helpful because we were just able to talk instead of typing out thoughts, which we did originally with the Google document for meeting 1. Some improvements for data meeting 3, I think we weren't able to use Blue Jeans to share our screens because we had to download add-ons that we didn't know about before the meeting. So we're all going to download those things so that we can share our screens while we're talking, and I think that'll be the best way for us to look at the data so we don't get confused about what we're talking about. And it's the best not in-person way for us to share information, so I'm excited to try that out as well. And I think we need to get started a little quicker. We struggled throughout the week trying to figure out what it was we needed to bring to the meeting, so we didn't even have the meeting until Monday. And I think it would have been better if we had been able to meet earlier than that. So those are some improvements for data meeting 3.